Okay. First of all, for the record, can you just state your name and the year you were born?
My name is Paul Taylor, and I was born in.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood in Memphis and the music you were exposed to when you were younger?
Yeah. Well, my childhood was pretty musically fortunate. My dad is a musician. He was a vocalist in the late '60s with a few different bands that were sort of like popular teenage rock and roll bands around here. Then he later became a rock and roll guitarist and vocalist as well, and a recording engineer subsequently. But so I grew up in a house full of recording instruments and musical instruments and recording equipment, and there were always musicians coming by the house, constant rehearsals, and going to sound check before their shows and stuff, and festivals. So I was just exposed to music really early on.
Okay. So what age were you when you first picked up an instrument?
I got my first set of Gretsch drums when I was 3.
3, wow.
Yeah.
And so did you learn to play immediately after that, or you just
there's a recording, Ron Capone, who is an engineer at Stax, and also around town, there's a recording of me playing somewhat of a decent backbeat, I have to say, and he's like, "Hey, Paul, play the drums," and I'm like... So yeah, I started pretty young. My first band was with Kermit the Frog and Winnie the Pooh and a few of my other guys, and I turned a big wheel on its side for my drum set, and we have concerts in my backyard.
That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about your aunt who was involved in like the history of Mary Williams?
I can. That was actually what I was just saying about growing up in Midtown on Monroe Street, which was, I basically grew up one block off of Overton Square, and this was in the 70s. I was born in the sort of mid-70s, early mid-70s, and so my aunt, when I grew up, she worked at Solomon Alfred's, which is where my dad and stepmom and a bunch of people played, so I was always running around there and saw that, and that was sort of my connection with her, is that she owned this house that we lived on the other side of. Subsequently, in recent years, I've come to really realize that she was she was married to a guy named Jerry Williams, who, regardless of any opinions about him or whatever, but he did, in fact, co-own a studio with Steve Cropper called Trans Maximus, or TMI. And so she was sort of on that scene, and she was a sort of B-list staff songwriter for Stax. And she wrote a bunch of songs with Mac Rice and Isaac Hayes and a bunch of those people, and she wrote some like off stuff. She I'm not as sure as I should be, but she wrote some sort of semi-hit for Paul Revere and the Midnight Raiders, and I know that she hung out with all those people, but she was actually pretty close with Priscilla Presley and Elvis, and spent a lot of time at Graceland and also at Graceland in LA, and my aunt was she was a bit of a knockout and just kind of a party girl as well, and so she was just on the scene. She was in the middle of the scene that I romanticize about daily. Still, like hanging out with Chip Spohn and Dan Penn and being over at American or at Stax and also at TMI. And I shouldn't say this, but I've always suspected, and she's never really confirmed or denied, that she had a relationship with Steve Cropper, which I don't know how much truth is in that, but I know that they were close. And also know that, due to the fact that she was married to Jerry Williams, who owned the studio, my mom wound up getting a job there as a secretary, and my dad was coming in doing a lot of like session work there and stuff, background singing. He sang, like for instance, some backgrounds on the Tower of Power record that was recorded here, Bump City, and even apparently, it was a different time, and people's mentalities were different, but like my dad just had this legion of like chicks that would just follow him around to different shows and stuff, and I think my mom was one of those people, and they wound up meeting sort of at the studio. I think when she first saw him, I don't know, whatever, but I don't know, I wasn't there yet. But that's how they met, and so really, I'm just starting to realize more these days that my aunt and her connection to music was really a sort of super important part of my musical genetics.
Yeah.
Because I always sort of attributed it to my dad's side, but I'm starting to find out more and more as well about my mom's side. There are a lot of country and bluegrass musicians and people who drove the bus for like different country guys and picked, and I don't know enough about it yet. I kind of slightly upset. You know, my parents were rock and roll musicians, and obviously kids don't come with manuals, but there never was much of like, hey, you need to know about your whole entire family and blah, blah, blah. So I never really knew much about all of that stuff, and I'm just now piecing it all together.
So do you think your parents encourage you to like take the musician route, or was that kind of just something you just kind of gravitated towards naturally?